Hello, everybody, and welcome to the 2020 Planet Forward Virtual Summit, this year from my home. Sorry about that. Normally we'd be on campus in Washington, D.C. at the Jack Morton Auditorium, but pandemic interferes, so a little social distancing. I'm Frank Sesno. I started Planet Forward some years ago, and I'm delighted to be here with you. And what we're going to do over the course of this summit series is really important, because around the world, new voices are emerging as powerful change makers and storytellers, racing the clock to slow these dangerous shifts in our global climate. And the planet truly is at a crossroads, a pandemic, an awakening on systemic injustice and racism, and these intense challenges of climate change, record fires and heat, extreme weather and drought. In the face of all of this, how do we advance environmental equity, inclusion, and the kind of institutional change that we need? And how do we tell stories around all of that so they inform, inspire, and have genuine impact? Our 2020 Summit Series will engage an incredibly and inspiring diverse range of voices, viewpoints, and stories, science, and solutions, with an explicit focus on impact. A series of breakout sessions will be available to you as well, so that you can get skills-based workshops, experience that, have conversations on really salient environmental and social issues, and have some virtual networking, the kind of networking we all need. I got to do some shout outs and thanks. None of this would be possible without our sponsors. Lindblad Expeditions, they provide the StoryFest Prize. We travel with them and with our students around the world. Last year to the Galapagos, 2 years ago to Alaska. We were supposed to be in Iceland this year looking at climate change, couldn't do that, but we're still hanging in there with Lindblad, and we'll be back on that. Stay tuned. Thanks to Discovery, Comcast, the Walton Family Foundation, National Geographic, the Food and Agriculture Organization of the UN, 3 Degrees, the National Council for Science and the Environment, Island Press, One Tree Planted. Hey, for every one of you who is at this summit today and in subsequent summits, for every one of you who brings a friend, we'll take all of those, that big number, and One Tree Planted will plant a tree for each and every one of you. So we could be doing thousands of trees as a result of this summit. Let's do that. Thanks to Mrs. Green's World, the GW School of Media and Public Affairs, our amazing Planet Forward Advisory Council, and the GW Office of Sustainability. I want to welcome our pillar schools. These are schools that are deeply involved with Planet Forward and have invested in us. Arizona State University, Middlebury, University of Arkansas, University of Arizona, and of course GW. Welcome to our consortium schools. They often host Planet Forward correspondence. They promote Planet Forward on their campuses, and they're very much involved and committed to the kind of mission that we've got, educating, training the next generation of environmental leaders and storytellers. We have a very special conversation to kick our summit off with. Have you ever heard of the Hip Hop Caucus? The Reverend Lennox Yearwood Jr. is the founder and president of the Hip Hop Caucus.
Stand up, please. Keep fighting. Keep fighting.
He's using his incredible skills as an expert, an activist, and a communicator to engage new people. He's also using stories, storytelling, through documentary, through film, through music. I spoke with him the other day, and it was a great conversation. And he's going to be back with us live afterwards to take your questions. So as you hear him, go to the chat section and put in your questions, and we'll engage you and the Reverend in just a moment. But first, meet the Rev.
Great to be here.
Well, it is great to have you, and all of us who are gathered. So look forward to the conversation we're going to have. Look, you're president and founder of the Hip Hop Caucus. You're a community activist. You're an environmentalist. You're a storyteller. You care so much about the planet, but the planet and our politics are on fire. What do you make of this mess we got going now?
Well, it's a lot. I mean, they are literally on fire. So you are right about that. And that's the politics. And the planet is also on fire as well. It's a lot going on. And on that note, I think people can't give up hope. The reality right now is that our generation is not only fighting for equality, we're fighting for existence. And this is our lunch counter moment for the 21st century.
What do you mean? What do you mean by that? It's our lunch counter moment.
So in the 60s, young people, great young people, black and white, all God's children, young people, they they saw that the lunch counters throughout this country was segregated. And they knew that was wrong. They just knew that the idea of white supremacy had to end. And so young students went to the Woolworth's counter, which used to be something called a Woolworth back in the day, and these other lunch counters, and they sat there and demanded that young people of color just got served. And they took it. They were nonviolent, and they took beatings. They got coffee poured on them. And literally, the lunch counter became a galvanizing tool to show this country at that time that racism and segregation was wrong.
You're saying that's what we got now, the equivalent with the environmental movement?
Climate crisis is our lunch counter moment for the 21st century. We have to be willing to be able to be at that lunch counter and do everything we can to fight for our existence.
I am hearing from young people and so many others in the midst of the social unrest and the Black Lives Matter movement that environmental equity has got to move to the top of the list, and that we've got to be much better about understanding what it is and who it engages. How has that new awareness around environmental equity changed your movement? This is what you've been arguing for a long time, but how has it changed what you're doing?
Well, I think the key thing is this. They're right, because climate justice is racial justice, and racial justice is climate justice. So they're right, and they realize that those who are first and worst impacted are communities of color. Black and Indigenous and people of color are the ones who are hit hardest by the climate crisis. And they also realize this kind of extractive mentality, this kind of mentality, this to this take, this greed of this putting forth profits before people, that doesn't work for humanity. And so they're realizing that to literally deal with this, they are now breaking down the silos. Our movement for many years has been a siloed progressive movement in which you had women's rights in this bucket, environmentalism in this bucket, gay rights in this bucket, whatever it was in their own bucket. And they said that doesn't work, because the same entity that is causing us all problems, that we need to come together and fight it. And so now we're breaking down the silos, coming together, and now moving it forward. So now when you hear about them for Black lives, it also engages and includes queer lives. Hear about queer lives, hear about women's rights about climate change and climate justice, because they're all connected. And that's what they're saying. At the root, these problems must be changed.
As I said, you are a storyteller, and the Hip Hop Caucus and Think 100%, you do podcasts, you do films, you do videos, you do music. I want to talk about Trouble in the Water. Trouble in the Water is an incredible production. What are you trying to say? Who are the artists? Who's the audience? What are you doing with it?
God's gift to this earth, that's what she prayed for. They've been stable since Cain killed Abel.
Trouble in the water. Trouble in the water.
I believe that storytelling is one of the main solutions to the climate crisis. And I'm not saying, people say, what do you mean, Rev? Are you saying that's going to take out the carbon from the atmosphere? It's going to stop the methane? To some degree, yes. Because if people understand the crisis they are in, and they can understand what to do about it, and the only way that can be done is through real, vibrant, powerful storytelling. And if they do that, they see it, then they can really say that, wow, this is really impacting me. So Trouble in the Water, we realized that, listen, the conversation around the Flint water crisis and lead is something that even people who were there in Flint didn't quite understand or didn't connect. And so we put together a video, got some of our friends like Common, not bad friends, to grab, and we were able to do a video that began to talk about the water crisis, not only in Flint, but also in this country, and about what we can do to solve it, and again, connect the dots so that they would see that what happened in Baltimore with Freddie Gray and how he had lead poisoning as well, and that caused the neurons and the neurological aspects to have that flight or fight reaction. Those things are what we begin to connect the dots to. So that, again, you can see how the climate crisis is connected to other things going on in our society.
I love what you wrote about this on the website. Eschewing the gentle folk sounds of typical environmental anthems, we bring hip hop, R&B, and pop to bend the climate genre while feeding our souls with powerful music.
Man, I love how you said it. That's exactly what it is. You know, it's funny. I try to be nice. You know, I want to be nice. A lot of times, the climate movement has been kind of a Birkenstock movement, right? And so and so they kind of like, they need to broaden and get a little bit of soul, a little bit of rhythm. And so that's what I try to do, because ultimately, the only way we win this is by broadening this movement. I would say this though. One thing that I realized is that, you know, people have asked me to bring culture to the climate movement. But the climate movement has a culture already. And I think that they have to deal with that. And they are comfortable seeing sometimes predominantly white men. And I think that we have to change that culture, that there are many other voices. There are young voices, there's queer voices, there's Black voices, there's brown voices, there's amazing indigenous voices. And so they got to begin to see different voices discussing this. And I think that's where our success and where we are beginning to see success. It's a process.
What I'm hearing is I'm hearing from students in our program and lots of others, including people who are on boards and of programs, and they say we got to move anti-racist, we got to be more inclusive, we've got to broaden this conversation. So how do they do that? And not just how do people of color do that, but how do people, you know, white people who've never done it before do that? They've never had the experience. This cannot be, a conversation of, by, and for a privileged few. This is everybody's planet. We're all going to suffer, and the people who suffer first are the people who have the fewest resources, who are the most vulnerable.
Yeah, privilege and being in those positions is tough. And we all have it in some way or another. But I do think that a lot of our organizations are beginning to confront that. I've been so excited, to be honest, to see groups like Sierra Club who have been confronting with this issue. They have done with their past and their founders in the conservation movement. And they've begun to literally look at that carefully. That's step one. Look at your past. Look at your history. Look at things that maybe you knew was wrong, but covered up and just moved it forward. Deal with that. And then the second step is to begin to educate yourself, get knowledge. There are so many books and podcasts and tapes about from white fragility to being anti-racist. They're just, listen, just Google it and you'll just have you'll have a ton of resources to go from. And then the third thing is love. I think that, at the end of the day, as humans, we gotta love one another. We're not gonna survive this thing if we only use that exterior that is on our skin. We gotta be deeper. And so I gotta love you, you gotta love me, and we gotta love each other. And I think that, to me, this is my faith tradition, love conquers all. But even if it wasn't that, I think we gotta have some kind of a mechanism where we can just respect and love one another. And I think that's actually what's at crisis now as well. There's a crisis with our climate crisis. There's also a crisis of white supremacy right now. And I think if we don't deal with both of those, then we're gonna lose. And losing is not a good option.
Let me ask you about another project you're working on. It Ain't Your Mama's Heat Wave.
Yeah.
What's Ain't Your Mama's Heat Wave?
I love hearing you say it. I think we had fun, and people maybe don't know, that's actually a comedy special. It's very serious. It's about Norfolk. We actually have a number of comedians who go down to Norfolk to study the climate crisis. What's happening in Norfolk is actually below sea level and it's sinking. It's very much like New Orleans. So what we wanted to, again, the key thing is storytelling. What we could come with the facts, and we've seen that a lot of these folks have facts upon facts upon facts. But what they don't have is a story, or they don't have a way to connect. And so we went down there to use comedy, and we figured they were laughing about it, then they may want to be involved with it as well. And so Ain't Your Mama's Heat Wave is just that. It's a funny comedy special that's coming out soon. You can check it out at think100climate.com to get more information. But it's going to be an amazing new trend. And I think that we've been blessed to now have so many more comedians. I didn't know how many comedians wanted to be about the climate crisis, but we have comedians now who are coming to figure out how they can tell jokes.
I do feel like a lot of politicians today are treating climate change the way I treated getting an STD in college, right? Somebody told me it was coming. The signs were there, but I ignored it until things started burning. And that's too late, right?
One of the comedians on there talks about, not buying their kids a car anymore, but buying them a kayak, right? So, because it's like they're gonna need to have a boat. And so those kind of things, those obvious things that are, very serious, but they're funny in some ways to kind of think about, man, this is ridiculous in an aspect. And that's kind of what comedy does. Comedy is a great way of just shedding a light on some things that are very hard to deal with. We've had comedians who have helped us in the past deal with racism, deal with sexism, deal with poverty, and say things about it that can also let people who don't know about it from the angle in other communities, they can then hear it from a different perspective as well.
How do you, as a storyteller, make this issue of climate resonate with young people of color who have so many different challenges that they're confronting? And maybe this is at the top of their agenda, but maybe not. How do you move it up their agenda?
Well, I think you tell the story. I think the way that we help young people, one is that we make it more captivating, and we tell the story through the mechanisms that they're already receiving other stories. So obviously through Instagram stories, through YouTube, through Twitch, through how they're already receiving their information. I think the next thing is that it's really to have more faith in young people in that regard. I think that they realize this is a crisis. I mean, they see it. And I think that what we've seen is that if we can just kind of get out the way, and yet young people tell their story, that it has a huge impact. And so we're seeing that as well. I think that we saw this throughout history and the civil rights movement. When we had like a young Dr. King who would get up there and talk these things. But then while he was speaking, you also had a Fannie Lou Hamer who would say that I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired. And even though she let that put the nouns and the verbs all together, there was something so powerful in what she said that it resonated with the whole country.
I love what you said in one of the interviews I saw that you did, and I wrote it down. We use science and data too much. We need art, culture, spirituality, and love to balance it out.
Most definitely. I mean, that's exactly it. And again, nothing again, I love my scientists. They're all fantastic and they're hardworking people. But I think that our movement has relied upon that a little too much to get across our point. And so I think we need to just kind of balance it off a little bit and bring in the other storytellers, from media to music to poetry, to begin to tell the story as well.
I interviewed Alexandra Villaseñor, who is an amazing 15-year-old woman who did Friday climate strikes at the UN. And you've talked about Greta Thunberg and young people all across the country. How do you see them actually turning their voice into action?
Well, they're doing it. They're getting out there into the streets. That's the first thing. I think that they realize, now they understand the power of the suites, but they also understand the power of the streets, and they're getting out there with the climate strikes, and they're doing it. Two, I think that they have a powerful sense of outrage and a moral authority that is real, because they will be the ones who will be around if this mess is not fixed. So when they turn into their 60s and 50s and 70s, man, it could be a rough place. And so they're now talking about that. And in many cases, they're suing. Some of them actually have litigation. So not only are they doing demonstration, but they're also doing litigation. But they also understand the power of legislation. And I think that's also very powerful. They understand the power of the Green New Deal and the importance of what it means to put policy You know, they're 15 or 14 and they can't even vote. They understand the power of policy because they understand that either you shape policy or policy will shape you. And they're amazing. Now, I think the one thing that we should help them with is that they need to have institutions. They're creating that. We should support them. Many of them from 0 Hour to the Sunrise Movement to Hip Hop Caucus. The young people there, we should make sure and support those institutions and give them the things they need to succeed. But they are phenomenal. And they literally, I think, are the ones who, if we can get the way, they will win.
If we are storytellers, which we are, we have to think about our audience and who our audience is, what we want our audience to do, how we want them to react. Trouble in the water. It ain't your mama's heat wave. Who's the audience? Who are you trying to get to? What do you want to leave them with?
Well, it's two parts. It's a layered. I mean, obviously, I want to reach young, multicultural millennials and Gen Z is my primary audience. You know, I want to reach them so they can have a voice and they can see themselves in the art and in the stories. But there's another back end story that I'm also hoping that the traditional climate movement, I'm hoping that they will see this movement just through the lens of this one aspect, and that they will begin to not only to see it as a multicultural movement, but to trust it as a multicultural movement, and to trust those who don't look like them or sound like them or have the same ways or actions. And I'm hoping that they will see them as being the solutions to this. You know, many people ask me all the time, they say, Rev, when you see this new generation, do you see them as being revolutionaries? And I say, you know what? I don't know if they're revolutionary so much. I mean, they definitely will put their bodies against the gears of the machine to bring it to a halt. But I see this new generation being solutionaries. And solutionaries meaning that they really want to find a solution to the problem we're dealing with. And so in that, being solutionaries, you got to have stories that can impact solutionary type people.
In your Hip Hop Caucus 2020 report, which I read, you have a line that struck me. It said, we talked about Think 100%. You say, Think 100% is about justice, solutions, and realness, and it isn't depressing.
That's right.
We got wildfires, we got hurricanes, we got heat waves. What's not to be depressed about?
Yeah, so this is where that breaking the silos piece and learning from others in the movement comes in. So this is for me as a Black man in this country. You know, I can look back at times and wonder how in the world the people who were taken from Africa, put on boats, came to this country 401 years ago, beaten, raped, forced into labor. How could those people have any semblance of hope, removed from their language, removed from their spirituality, taken from their wives, children taken from their mothers? How in the world can those people have any hope and even any kind of idea of wanting to be a part of the country that they're now in? And you see that despite that, they still believe in an idea that we shall overcome. And so I think that mentality led them from being slaves to even one of the descendants becoming president of this country. And that is the mentality you got to have. You got to have a mentality that despite all that is coming at you, that we shall prevail, we shall overcome, we shall make it. We will weep, we will cry, and we may even succumb, but we can't ever give up hope. And I think that's the mentality that this kind of movement must have, that we have wildfires, we have droughts, we have floods, we have devastation. Man, it looks just that we can't handle it no more. But I believe this, where we have organized people, you can make it happen. And I believe that organized people beats organized money every single time. So we can come together. Black, white, brown, red, male, female, straight, gay, theist, atheist, humans. If we can come together, then we can overcome anything, including the climate crisis.
You are amazing. I cannot imagine a better way to end a conversation. I want to just thank you so much for everything you do, for the fight that you fight, for the inspiration that you share. And I hope this is the beginning of what will be an ongoing conversation between us and everybody on the planet. Thank you.
Thank you.
And we're back, and welcome, Reverend Yearwood. You there? Can we see you? There you are. That was such a great conversation. We have lots of questions from lots of people, but before we turn to their questions, anything you want to add to that?
No, thank you for having me, and thank you for just showing a little bit of light on different ways that the Hip Hop Caucus is fighting this climate crisis.
Yeah, it's a very challenging and a very important time, and I really want to thank you again for being our opening speaker here at our.
I'm wearing a different hat too. My hat. I wore my
money
hat
pipeline. Okay.
Was 10 years in regards to the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change report. So we had 12 years, now we have 10 years. Happy Food Day, everybody. And also my hat today says Stop the Money Pipeline and regarding get our money out of fossil fuels. So just
I want to turn to the questions from our wonderful attendees and just engage the discussion that way. Kim asks you, and this is an important one, especially for you. What can our religious and faith traditions bring to these struggles?
Yeah, well, a lot. I mean, I think they can bring a tremendous, at this time, I think there is a need for the traditional religious organizations to be engaged in the fight for our planet. I think they must step up. I think that some of them have not done all they need to do. I've been happy to see what the Pope from the Catholic Church has written about this, and many others have done. So I think there's some room there. But also there's a faith, there's an other kind of faith. There's a faith of just persevering, that even if you don't have a faith in some kind of being or whatever you may have from either Jewish or Buddhist or Muslim or Christian, I think it has to be a faith in believing and overcoming. And I think that's the one thing we need to have as well.
And can that faith and can the organization around that faith be brought to bear in a way that is powerful at this very difficult moment where climate and justice and racism and politics are all colliding in our culture?
Well, I think we're dealing with, I think the church is dealing with those same exact things. I think the church we're seeing now in many instances is dealing with the fact that they have racism within their church, and they're dealing with the issue of other problems, being patriarchal, being homophobic. And so as they are dealing with those same situations, what it means to be human, the issue of the climate crisis is also one of the things they must deal with. So no, I agree with you. I think that can the church deal with it? They must. So to answer that question, a great question, I am hopeful that the church gets on board. But I'm also grateful that the traditional climate movement also allows for, again, different ways of expressing, your activism should be at the forefront. Because obviously, if you're maybe in the church tradition, you may have a different way of approaching it than maybe somebody who's coming in from a scientific aspect.
So let me follow on to that, because somebody in our audience asked this. He says, kudos to Reverend Yearwood. One of the many things you exemplify is the power of faith leaders in fighting the climate crisis.
I appreciate that.
And what, if any, involvement, goes the question, do you have with other leaders of faith yourself to coalesce around the climate change challenge?
Well, that's a layer. We might have to come back to have the long-term conversation on that. Just folks know I am a real reverend. I get asked it a lot. I went to seminary, went to Howard University Divinity School, and was actually a chaplain in the Air Force and serving my country. But I'll say this: I am also hip hop. So when I first got being involved with the hip hop community and working with a lot of the hip hop organizations, I was shunned actually by a lot of the church. They didn't feel that being in hip hop or being with the urban community A lot of churches wouldn't work with me. Now,
literally, you were shunned. I mean,
oh no, people would walk. I mean, I would go to a church and speak, and they'd be like, "This is Reverend Yearwood from the Hip Hop Caucus," and people would walk out. That's real. No, you got to understand. It wasn't. I mean, Hip Hop Caucus did an amazing job of what we've done to get to this point to being more understood. But back in 2005 and 2004, man, no, it wasn't that much love. People had an idea what hip hop was, and so I had to deal with that personally. And actually, it was a blessing in disguise because that forced me. The privilege that I may have had of being, having gone to college, being a minister, that was wiped away because I saw that if you can treat me this way, and I used to be an Air Force chaplain, and you could walk out, then how are you going to treat that 16-year-old in hip hop? And so that allowed me to identify more with my community and also the spirituality in my community as well.
I think the question about the role of religious leaders is huge. Think of someone like Catherine Hayhoe, who is so influential in this movement, yourself and others. By the way, that question came from our friend Mark Lichtenstein from SUNY College of Environmental Science and Forestry, so thank you for that. Here's another one, though, and this takes a different shape for you. And this actually has some interesting implications for the diversity and inclusion question that we're talking about. What do you say to the men and women who earn a living in the fossil fuels industry?
What do I say to them?
Yeah, I mean, you're calling for a big inclusive movement to get away from fossil fuels. There are a lot of people from all different backgrounds who work in that industry, depend upon it for their livelihoods.
Yeah, that's too bad. We had to transition the same way we had to transition from an economy based upon slave labor. We couldn't continue that. It had to end. Slavery was unjust and immoral. So is the fossil fuel industry. It has to end. You cannot have an industry that's based upon the polluting and the killing and the destruction of our planet. Your business plan cannot be a death sentence for us. And so that has to end. And I understand. And we have to help. We as a country need to help you to transition. So as we are beginning to close the coal mines and transition from oil and gas, we need to help those who are working in that industry to transition to other industries or to get or to be retrained. But I'm not going to apologize for an industry that is literally killing people. That has to end now.
All right, another similarly interesting and provocative question. How do you start the conversation? Again, that's from our audience. How do you start the conversation that global capitalism and neo-imperialism must be dismantled for the climate crisis and racism to be adequately dealt with, especially in regards to environmental racism and its disproportionate effects on people of color and indigenous people?
I mean, I think it's critical. I think the question the point the person who's asking the question is making is simply this: we have an industry that has been based upon the extractive measures of what they've been doing, and using capitalism, literally putting profits before people, cannot continue. And so I think that particularly when those who are most vulnerable are the ones hurt by that system of greed, that has to end. And again, the same as before, it just can't continue. One thing that I said earlier in that great video that y'all put together with our conversation, was this, is that we have to be in a point where we cannot continue being reliant on fossil fuels anymore. This is our lunch counter moment for the 21st century. And so like it was in the 20th century, when they were fighting for equality, and we're definitely still fighting for equality, yes, and against white supremacy, we're now fighting for existence in the 21st century. And when you're fighting for existence, there's no game to be played here. That's not a game. And so unfortunately, we have to change, because we will all succumb to your madness.
So as you know, and as I think most of the people who join us here know, but I just would repeat for those who may not, Planet Forward is very proud to have a consortium of colleges and universities, very different types of colleges and universities across the country that we work with and who work with us. We have Planet Forward correspondents, students who are reporting out these sorts of stories from their campuses and communities. One of them, who used to be a a correspondent of ours from SUNY ESF, Environmental Science and Forestry, Lindsay Eberhardt. She has a question on video, and I want to let her pose that to you directly now. So we'll roll that video and then you can answer.
Hello, Reverend, and everyone at Planet Forward. My name is Lindsay. I am a senior at SUNY ESF in Syracuse, New York, studying environmental studies. My question today is, how do you approach the balance in acknowledging that this climate crisis has not been something that's been caused by you and your community, yet you are all left in many areas to bring solutions to the table and clean up the mess? In other words, how do you move productively through the idea that this isn't your mess to clean, yet wake up every single day and do exactly that? Thank you.
Go ahead.
Yeah, no. Well, thank you for that question, and thank you for what you're doing over there at SUNY. hope you're making it through this COVID process well. But to your question, well, people of color, Black, Indigenous, Brown, people of color aren't the main drivers of this, both domestically and internationally. We have no choice but to clean it up. When you have situations like Hurricane Delta, Hurricane Laura, Hurricane Katrina, Hurricane Maria, Superstorm Sandy, wildfires, floods, wildfires on the west and floods on the east, hurricanes and all kinds of disasters throughout the Midwest. And it hits particularly people of color and poor white people the hardest. I think that we have to stand up and fix it. That's why we have to unify. And why I said earlier, why we must have organized people. And I believe organized people beats organized money. But to your point about this, I think there is a real conversation that we are having in our community about climate resiliency and climate adaptation, because again, we cannot be ones left behind to just drown and die. And so we are having conversations about the reality of what it means. And that's one of our documentaries that we're working on now, underwater projects, that I'm so happy that we're putting forth, is something that deals with the housing crisis and the flood walls in Norfolk, Virginia, and how that is impacting them. We're also having conversations with many places around the country, from those around the Great Lakes, like Cleveland and Detroit and Milwaukee, to down in Houston and Port Arthur, Texas, and Lafayette, Louisiana, and New Orleans. We're having these conversations, Mobile, Alabama, around these places of water and around what it means to survive. And so you're right, it's hard and difficult when you're not the one contributing to the problem. It's hard when you're not the one benefiting from causing the problem. But I also think that this is something that we have to deal with, that aspect from the fossil fuel industry, but also from the climate movement, because let me say this too. We have a climate movement. I'm on the board of Green 2.0, which deals with how many people of color work for or on the boards of big green organizations. And I can say it ain't great. And so I think that our movement has to change. As I mentioned, I think we have a movement that has too many, God bless them, but we have too many, white cis men that are in positions of power throughout this movement. And I think we have to have a more diverse, inclusive movement. And so I think that has to change. I think that can only change not from the movement itself, but even those who are funding the movement. I think they have to begin to hold these organizations accountable and say, listen, until you begin to show us that you're going to be more diverse and more inclusive and literally have more people of color and more people throughout the ranks from the top to the bottom within the movement, then we're not going to give you the funding. And I think that also is going to help us to fix this problem, so to speak.
And there are a lot of ways to bring that attention and that pressure, and that needs to come in from a lot of people, is what you're saying. There are a lot of other questions here, and unfortunately, we're going to make this the last one because we have some amazing other people that we need to get into this time. But what a number of people have commented on or asked about is your very powerful comment that we need to be solutionaries, not just revolutionaries.
Most definitely.
And Minna Brown asks, how do you advise people to find their own niches as solutionaries, to stay motivated and resilient in the long term with, against these long and often overwhelming challenges?
For one, I think, as we would say in our environment, do it local. I think the best way for any activist is to look at operate from the local aspect. I think if you can find out where you are in your community and get involved there, that's the most important. Before you go to try to fix other communities, work within your own community. I think it's very important. And I think that in being a solutionary, and I think it's very important, and I do believe this, for Gen Z and millennials, you are the solutionaries that we need to solve this. I believe it with all my heart. But that also means that you're going to have to be willing to sacrifice. You're going to have to be willing to put your body against the gears of the machine to bring it to a halt. That means that it will be hard, but you got to have faith, and you can't do it alone. Let me end with this. I don't care what your faith background or situation may be, but the one thing to do this work, you can't do this work by pulling on yourself. You have to have something outside of yourself to pull on. You cannot do this work being jaded or cynical or depressed. You can only do this work when you understand that you're fighting for a bigger cause. And so that's the way you can be solutionary. And I know we have this amazing Planet Forward that you are solutionary.
Solutionary storytellers, the power to reach people through media. We have a lot of other questions. People, thank you very much for your activism here. A lot of commentary in the chat and other questions. We can't get to it all, so my apologies for that. But Rev, thanks really very, very much. As I say, I hope this is the beginning of a conversation. You inspire people, and good luck in all that you're doing. And I hope you continue to be a really outspoken voice. By the way, when is It Ain't Your Mama's Heat Wave? When is that documentary or that film going to be out?
No, great. Well, we're getting ready to put it out. We're actually doing our coloring now for folks who know that piece. So, but go to think100climate.com, think100climate.com, and you can be up to date on all that amazing stuff.
Well, thank you again, and really do appreciate it.
Thank you.
Good luck. Well, as we move forward here, we go on to something else. The Reverend mentioned World Food Day. World Food Day marks the 75th anniversary of this UN Food and Agriculture Organization. It's an exceptional moment in countries around the world, as countries around the world deal with so many crises, the pandemic, conflict, drought, climate change. Planet Forward has a relationship with UNFAO here. We've been a partner with them, in partnership with them since 2015. Each year, we elevate student stories around the issue of food, and issues about how to grow, find sustainable agriculture on a changing planet. Now, normally we have a little bit of contest there, and we take some of the really amazing students who have submitted the best stories to Rome to participate and to observe the Committee on World Food Security Conference. It's a popular topic on Planet Forward. Lots of students weighing in. As you can see here, this is Rohan Agrawal, one of our former correspondents, who did a piece not very long ago when we were in Rome, from the people he spoke with there. Matilda Kreidner from George Washington University did one called Tipping the Balance for Fisheries on a Small Scale. For the past month here at Planet Forward, we have been collecting your stories on nutrition and food for World Food Day Storytelling Award and for our next round here. As I mentioned, climate change, environmental equity, food insecurity are so closely linked. I'm honored to welcome Vimlendra Sharan. He's the director of the FAO Liaison Office for North America. He has a special message for you and us and how we can affect meaningful change to feed the planet.
Good afternoon, friends. Happy World Food Day and greetings from FAO to all those joining the Planet Forward Virtual Summit 2020. World leaders gathered 75 years ago on this day to establish the Food and Agriculture Organizations of the United Nations and tasked it to end global hunger. Over the last 7 decades and a half, the world has made great strides in reducing food insecurity, alleviating poverty, and increasing agricultural productivity. Yet, the job is far from done. Even today, nearly 700 million people are facing hunger, while more than 2 billion people lack access to safe and nutritious food. Over 3 billion people cannot afford a healthy diet. And COVID-19 is making matters worse, with nearly 130 million more people likely to suffer from chronic hunger due to economic recession worldwide. Add to all this the negative impact of extreme weather events and intensification of conflicts around the world, and we have a perfect recipe for disaster waiting to happen. With the theme of grow, nourish, sustain together, our actions are our future. World Food Day this year calls for global solidarity to ensure a more resilient and robust food system capable of seeing us through these troubled times. We need to build back better and establish a new normal. Food system must be transformed from production to consumption and all places in between. We must do things differently. The new normal must eradicate hunger and malnutrition from our midst. On the occasion of the World Food Day, I want all of us to pledge and make food our responsibility. Thank you.
And thanks to you, Vimlendra. Vimlendra's been a fabulous partner and is really helping us drive this conversation. Again, the deadline to submit your food stories to us is October 26th. Go to planetforward.org, World Food Day Award. Planetforward.org, World Food Day Award, one word. We'll announce the winners here on our summit series on the 30th of October. Well, now we'd like to introduce you to some exceptional voices of the next generation, environmental storytellers. You'll be hearing more of them from them, I'm sure, all of whom have a very special interest in Planet Forward and in expanding this conversation. We're very pleased to have them all join us now. Deepti Bansal Gage, she graduated with a JD in the spring of 2020, just taken the bar. She was a Planet Forward correspondent and she won StoryFest 2020 award. She'll soon begin working as an environmental attorney in DC. Anthony Karambelas, he's the University of Chicago graduate student in the interdisciplinary program there, preparing for a PhD, studies in political science and sociology. He too was a Planet Forward correspondent and a StoryFest finalist. Donnie Monk is a senior environmental studies major at SUNY ESF, where she's focused on policy planning and law. She's also a blogger and a podcast host for her platform there, Environmental Impressions for All. She's a 2020 Planet Forward correspondent too. And Summer Wilke. Summer is pursuing a master's degree in biological and agricultural engineering at the University of Arkansas, working for the Resiliency Center there on water quality. She serves as the Native American Student Ambassador for the Center for Multicultural Education. So welcome to you all. Wave to our audience so everybody can see you, and we're all still good. That's great. Deepti, let me start with you. You heard Reverend Yearwood speak passionately about expanding this conversation. It's something you want to do professionally. What are you intending and why?
Yeah, first I want to say thanks for having me and for having this conversation. I think it's a really important conversation to have. And as I went through my undergraduate and law school career and worked with Planet Forward, I discovered more about myself and about what I want to prioritize in my day-to-day life and in my career. So I use my degrees to become an environmental lawyer. I'll be starting work here in DC shortly, and hopefully be able to advocate for the environment and also be a solutioneer, as Reverend Yearwood said.
A solutionary.
Solutionary, sorry about that. Yeah, solutionary. And not only that, but use my storytelling abilities that I learned from Planet Forward to create compelling stories for my advocacy.
Donnie, you're a blogger. You've got this podcast. A lot of some of what you've written, which I've seen, has focused on the very important issue of and kind of intersection of race and environment. Tell everybody what you're most interested in.
First and foremost, thank you for having me today, and I'm really excited to meet you, Reverend Yearwood. Today, as far as what I really am doing with my research and what my passions are is Black environmentalism, and necessarily just making sure that we're connecting historical information to current climate change issues and how perceptions may be different amongst different individuals.
Summer, you're a citizen of the Cherokee Nation of Oklahoma. You're working with a very interesting project right now in your area of interest with tribal elders. I'd love for you to explain that to people.
Thanks for the opportunity. I have the privilege of working with my community, learning from elders and being guided by elders in a participatory community project where we're telling a story that everyone is involved in telling about access and obstacles to access to environmental resources and cultural plants and biodiversity.
Yep. And Anthony, let's bring you into the conversation. Then we're going to open this up. One of the stories that of many that you did and that I was reading that I find most interesting and was your entry to the StoryFest contest was about Indigenous communities.
That's right, Frank. I wrote a profile on Ruth Miller, an Indigenous climate activist from Anchorage, Alaska. I actually met her at the inaugural UN Youth Climate Summit, where she talked about, the same problems that Reverend Yearwood, is mentioning, the homogeneity of the kind of people that we see at these sorts of summits. The kinds of people who are chaining themselves, to pipelines are not the kind of are not the same people that we're seeing at these summits. Delivering talks to people that really get the word out. And so, a lot of my conversation with her was about assessing, why that is.
Obviously, our focus here and our focus with the Reverend Yearwood is expanding this conversation, bringing about change, making it more inclusive, bringing in people of color and indigenous people, and the storytelling around it to make that happen. So you're all involved, engaged with storytelling at one level or another. Deepti, why don't you start us with this? How do you make the narrative compelling enough to expand those who are truly engaged with this? What are you doing? And obviously you said you're going to do this in the law, so you're not going to be a filmmaker or a journalist, maybe so down the line, but to start with, how do you see that?
Yeah, so I was able to do a few stories with Planet Forward, and some of them were engaging with Native American communities in the U.S., particularly the Kashaya Band of Pomo Indians. And I thought it was really important, and I used my own perspective as a person of Indian descent who's American, to think, if this was my story, how would I want to make sure it would be told? And so one of the things I took into consideration when I was doing that story was this needs to be the voice of the people who I'm portraying, and I need to make as many direct quotes as I can, and I need to make sure that they approve of the message I'm sending. We've seen historically that, a lot of marginalized voices have been misconstrued. So I think that's a really important way to make sure as a storyteller, we're getting the voices across firsthand.
That you are the conduit for those voices as well as a storyteller. Donnie, how about you?
No, I agree. I believe that the voices are also. I'm sorry, I kind of got lost in anything silly.
No, that's okay. We all get lost. No, the question I was asking is, how do you use that power of narrative? How do you capture the story to make it a more inclusive cast of characters, really?
Oh yeah. So a lot of what I believe with that is you have to actually get the voices of the individuals. And for me, I believe that that's going to the actual communities and doing some of that participation with the community and making sure that whichever audience you're really trying to approach and trying to share a story about, you should make sure that you're doing that appropriately and culturally relevant also. So just ensuring that you're properly documenting their history in an appropriate way.
Summer, you and I talked earlier about different narratives, very different kind of fundamental frame that Indigenous storytelling and the way that description and embrace of the world around us, how that looks compared to sort of Western narratives and storytelling. What are you learning from your tribal elders
what are you trying to emulate?
First, I want to respond to Deepti and Donnie's comments. If
Sure.
I could, I just would like to add that the Native American Journalistic Association is developing ethics on reporting on Native American stories, and that's an awesome resource. And then also within research, there are Native people, Indigenous people developing ethics that could be applied for research purposes. So I want to shout those things out. But then back to the storytelling and maybe having a different approach. I think with our project, I learned this term recently of decentralized storytelling, and I think very much that applies here, and is something that we're trying to do where the community is part of the story and part of the narrative. And so instead of one person reporting a specific story about someone else, everyone's involved and we're collectively writing the story as we go.
Anthony, I'm going to come to you in a minute, but first I want to just roll in a quick video clip here. We're producing segments here at Planet Forward with WNET PBS that sort of engages a series of these conversations. It's the Peril and Promise portal that you can find, and we're talking in our first episode that we did with young people about how we engage the climate crisis and the role that young voices can have in driving this. We spoke to, you may have heard of her, 15-year-old climate activist Alexandria Villaseñor. She spoke at the Democratic National Convention, as a matter of fact, not bad for a 15-year-old, about the power of youth in the climate movement. Here's what she had to say about sort of personal storytelling and the climate deniers.
I have had encounters with one climate denier relative at, of course, a Thanksgiving. And one thing I found when it comes to people who don't really believe in the science, what I start off with is having a common ground. I think that coming off on this more just talking on a personal level can be much more effective than getting aggressive with them, because then people go on the defense. And so what I usually start off with is starting off saying how I've been affected by the climate crisis or how other young people have, because personal stories really matter to people. And that's how you start to see a connection and see people slowly start to change this very narrow mindset of not really seeing the science and the large issue that climate change is.
So, Anthony, let me turn the question to you. How do you talk to climate deniers?
Yeah, a lot of my work, Frank, as a profiler, really necessitates that I recede into the backdrop. So I'm highlighting other voices. I'm lifting essentially as I climb. But she's right. I think that for personal essays, for op-eds, an authoritative voice is kind of what you need. You need to be expressing yourself, and especially young people, I think, need to be writing more about the environment, about their own thoughts, because while movements like Fridays for Future, like 0 Hour, may be barging their ways into halls of power as they should, I think it's also important to recognize the ways in which we can also be driving the narrative.
In the couple of minutes that we have remaining, and I want to remind everybody who's watching that when we finish here, we're offering a series of amazing breakout sessions where you can break into smaller groups and hear from people who are very much on the front lines of this in terms of how they're organizing movement, storytelling, also maximizing your digital footprint and impact. And I'll talk more about that in a moment. But in these final moments, I'd like to ask each of you to offer some advice, some pointers to other students who are watching, who might want to be active, have impact, expand the conversation, be storytellers, to some of the leaders that are here now. For example, the executive director of an organization called the National Council for Science and the Environment, which partners with us, is watching here today. So are several professors at universities all around the country. What advice, what suggestions do you have for how you engage this broader conversation, use your voice, and use the power of story or media or that sort of reaching out that you're capable of doing? Donnie, why don't we start with you?
So on like a scale for myself, I believe that ways that you can engage the voice in this issue is just honestly for me, like being active on my social medias and networking in those areas, just being like stepping outside of the box. Like it took a lot for me to even start my own blog and not feeling like it's not feeling scared to do what you think is right. Definitely do what's best for our environment and try to use as many outlets as you can, because through different forms of arts and sciences, we're going to be able to bring some change to our planet. So just finding your like niche and like actually like molding that into something that's going to play a big role in like this big puzzle piece that we have to put together.
Summer, how about you? What are your pointers or your advice for people who want to do this?
I would like to see more people recognize where they are, whose traditional land they are on, and what is the existing knowledge that remains about how to live well in that place. We need to think locally and lift up those voices. Science needs to recognize the credibility of those voices and that knowledge. And I think that also love and unity, like Reverend Yearwood said, is so critical, and reaching people on a level that they can relate to.
Anthony.
Right. That's the one piece of advice I can really offer. I think there's this perception that you need to have, a certain stamp of approval before you can begin to submit pieces to newspapers. My opinion is that, most journalists, me included, have no idea what they're talking about. They learn that stuff on the job. And I think that's something that we need to tell all our young people out there. Is the only way that you're going to get in this industry is if you make the effort. And so I'm just going to plug my organization, Force of Nature. Here, we're a youth nonprofit that focuses on content at the nexus of mental health and climate change. So if any of you have personal essays or just op-eds or profiles that you think might be interesting related on that to that topic, please hit me up at anthony@forceofnature.xyz. I'll be looking forward to your pitch.
All right, do the address one more time. You got to say it twice so people get it. Nice and slow. Right. Go ahead.
Anthony@forceofnature.xyz.
.xyz. All right, that's great, Anthony. Thanks. Deepti, you get the last word.
Yeah, I think I'd like to echo what everybody said, but also don't be afraid to take on an opportunity. I went into law school not ever imagining I'd become a storyteller from it. And everything you've ever wanted is one step outside of your comfort zone. That's one of my favorite quotes. So don't be afraid to get uncomfortable and to have conversations with people who you might disagree with, and go into it with an open mind, because that's the only way we can succeed as a society, is if we listen to the other side and try to absorb all the knowledge they have and come to a solution.
Well, I want to thank all of you for sharing your thoughts, your comments, your suggestions today. Very important. And thank you for all the storytelling and the impact that you've had. And I know there's going to be a lot more. We will stay in touch, and you're part of our Planet Forward family, and we intend to keep you here. So we'll come back to all of that. I think that's what this conversation has done too, is to show how many voices, how powerful voices can be, and from so many different places and backgrounds, and that's important. Thanks so much for joining us, and keep sharing your stories that help us move the planet forward.